thank you for being here today on a Saturday morning. I appreciate your dedication to justice and supporting our vulnerable and marginalized students. And so it's wonderful to have you here at the 4th annual Breaking the Pipeline Symposium. We're a little bit thinner than I think we would be based on registrations alone. I'm hoping that parking is maybe the only reason and people are trickling in. But we're going to go ahead and get started. And so I wanted to make a few words to welcome you today and before we get started with our keynote. And so just kind of like underlying why we're all here, we come here each year and we gather to recharge, regroup, and recommit to serving our marginalized and vulnerable students who are being pushed out of schools here in Utah. And so this is an issue that we've been talking about as a community for years. For the last 4 years, we've been passing really wonderful legislation on the issue. And certainly, we've been talking about this a lot, but yet this issue still has a lot of relevancy for today. We still have great disparities in our juvenile justice system. We still have great disparities in our adult criminal justice system in terms of racial and ethnic groups. Of course, also our students with disabilities and students with that have been in foster care have been deeply affected by the school to prison pipeline here in Utah. And it's still something that we're seeing in those systems. Moreover, we're still seeing disparities in these groups when it comes to our actual schools. Our overall graduation rates have, as a whole, been improving, but for these different marginalized groups, we've been seeing disparities where the growth has not been the same in terms of graduation rates and dropout rates. And so certainly there's a lot of work to be done. Moreover, a really relevant issue is the issue of school shootings. That's something on a lot of people's minds, from the students, from community members, and people in our schools to our legislators. It has all of us concerned, and I think all of us really want school safety and want our students going to school to be coming home safely to our families and to our communities. However, due to concerns around school safety, we've been seeing effort around the nation to kind of lock down schools, to look at our students with a more suspicious eye, which tends to have a disparate effect. And so we've certainly been having some of that here, so you'll be learning more about that when it comes to our legislative panel. And so this issue is just as relevant as ever. So I also wanted to note, you may have noticed, depending on when you registered for the symposium, there's been a few changes when it came to our program. Something about today, several folks had to be called out last minute, like sincerely, like this was last week, out of town. So we've had to make a few changes. We've done our very best to keep the integrity of the original programming. So for our keynote, we switched over to Dr. Kathleen, who will be talking about child development and how it relates to juvenile justice and its implications to marginalized communities. And so, and the rest of our program is very similar, basically been kept intact. Maybe a few people that we originally had have moved over. And so with that, I'm actually going to hand it over to Camber.
Hi, everyone, and thank you all for being here. I am Camber Roberts. I am a student at the College of Law, and I'm also working on the symposium through the Social Justice Student Initiative, which is a student organization I'm really happy to be a part of. I want to take a moment to say thank you to the sponsors of this event. We have ASUU, the Utah Minority Bar Association, Racially Just Utah, the College of Law, all of the event staff that have helped coordinate this event and make sure it goes on. Everybody here today from the College of Law, the volunteers that we have, the IT staff, and then the coordinators of this event, the planners. We've obviously been working really hard to make sure that this is an event that is successful and that really speaks to the issues that we're trying to talk about and combat. So thank you all for coming and joining us, and thank you to everybody who's helped put this event on. We're really grateful. I wanted to note that we will have a Q&A after each of our panels today, and to do that, we're going to be utilizing the Slido app. If you guys are not familiar with the Slido app, it's going to come up here. So what you'll do is go to slido.com, you'll enter the code, and then you'll be able to submit your questions that way, and we will then read those questions to our keynote, to the panelists and everything, so that you're able to get questions that you have to the keynote. And if you're unable to access the Slido app, we do have mics at the front, so you should be able to use those and ask questions that way as well. Now I would like to introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Kathleen VanAntwerp. She is joining us from Ventura, California. Dr. K is a leader in juvenile justice reform. She has been at the forefront of developing effective educational and youth outreach programs for over 30 years. She has led the way in introducing science in child and adolescent development to juvenile crime prevention programs, law enforcement agencies, probation officers, and juvenile court judges. This work has taken her internationally. She recently presented at Oxford University's Roundtable on Early Childhood Education. The work Dr. VanAntwerp does has directly transformed operations of youth outreach centers throughout the U.S. We are incredibly lucky to have her with us today, so everyone please join me in welcoming Dr. K.
Okay, let's test this. Is it on? Can you hear me? Okay. Good morning, good morning. Thank you, Kathy. Thank you, Camber. Thank you for that beautiful introduction. And through the words that both of these intelligent, articulate women have shared with us, we know why we're here. We know why we're here together, why we've joined together today. And so in our time together, and what I'd like to do is not only tell us why we're here, but you figure out your why, what brought you here, okay? And then we'll figure out the what, and we'll figure out the how. Those are the things we're going to do together. But we're going to do something first. I'm going to ask you in your space to stand up and find one other person and just face each other. Just find one other person and face them. Chewy, can I steal you? You're going to need your hands clear, so you're going to have to put down your food, put down your notebooks. Thank you, friend. You got to be closer than that. You got to be right next to each other. Find another person. Okay? All right. I'm going to ask you to do something very simple. Okay? So Chewy has accepted my invitation to work with me. So Chewy and I are going to just simply count back and forth to the number 3. For example, I will say 1, Chewy will say 2, I will say 3, Chewy will say 1, I will say 2. We're not counting any higher than 3. So watch this, because you're going to do this. Sounds simple, right? We're only counting to 3. Does everybody know how to count to 3? All right, let's see how we do. You ready? 1,
2,
3,
1,
2,
3,
1,
2,
3,
2, 1,
2. Okay, so that's it. So let's see it. Try it.
2.
See, they're messing up. Okay, all right. I'm going to bring us all back together. Don't sit down. How was that? Was that easy? Right? You know how to count to 3, right? All right, so this time, Chewy and I are going to do the same thing, but instead of the number 1, I'm going to clap. He'll say 2, I'll say 3. He'll clap. I'll say 2. So you're replacing just the number 1 with a clap. You ready?
2,
3, 2, 3. All right, go for it. We're going to trick them. Okay, all right. Bring us all back together. How was that? Was that a little bit harder? Yeah? A little bit. Okay. Anybody making mistakes? Anybody messing up? Yeah. How does it feel when you make a mistake? Huh? A little, okay. A little uncomfortable maybe. All right. Well, you can count to 3. Now you can clap and count to 3. Now you're going to clap for number 1. You're going to snap for number 2. And then you're going to say number 3. Don't do it yet. Watch Chewy and I. You ready? 3. 3.
3.
Okay, he's good. All right, so go for it. Snap, clap for number 1, snap for number 2, say number 3. You watch people, they're concentrating so hard, right? But all we're doing is counting to 3. There's a method. All right. Bring us back together. We just have one more round. How are you feeling out there? Okay. A little bit. You're concentrating your brain, right? So on this one, you're going to clap for number 1, you're going to snap for number 2, and you're going to stomp for number 3. But when you make a mistake, I need to hear a woo-hoo-hoo-hoo. When you make a mistake, all right, I need to hear you, all right? So let's try. Watch Chewy and I first. Okay, ready? Woo! All right, go for it. All right. Thank you very much. All right, give yourselves a hand. You did it. Give Chewy a hand. Thank you, Chewy. Thank you for coming up here. All right, you can have a seat, buddy. Good job, Chewy. On the spur of the moment, stepping up here. So, what did we just do? Why did we do that activity? What'd you say? Icebreaker, yes, icebreaker. What else did we do? We woke up our brains, okay? So in order for us to spend a day engaged in the concept of learning, we need to start 2 hemispheres of the brain interacting with each other. And in that activity, you just woke up both hemispheres of your brain. You also woke up the base of your brain, cerebellum, and the base of that brain requires movement. So we know that when we move, we activate learning. All right? So I want us to think about those 2 concepts when we go throughout the day. The more engaged you are in your learning, the more engaged you are in participation, active movement, the more you're going to take away from today, all of the workshops. But I want you to think about school. Do we allow children to engage in those capacities for the most part? Okay? Our classrooms aren't really built around the development of children and how children learn and how children grow. So we're going to take a moment to look at that today. What are we here to do today? We're here to talk about breaking the school to prison pipeline. Breaking the school to prison pipeline. But what I like about the title of this conference is empowering. Empowering the community to pay attention, to stand united. As a society, we must come together and we must use our voices for the marginalized communities, families, and children whose voices are not heard. And that is one of the reasons that we are gathered here today at the University of Utah, to become part of a movement to break the school to prison pipeline. We should not have to have the word school and prison in the same sentence, and yet throughout America, throughout the United States, a very developed nation, we have an epidemic going on in our public school system. The concept of the American public school system is a great concept. It's the idea that education should be free and available for everyone. But since its inception, it has never been for everyone, and it has never been equal, and it has never been welcoming to all of the different community members that we have. So we have to continue to make that change. I think it's interesting, the quote on the wall over here happens to be Martin Luther King. The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. Okay? We were having a conversation before about how slow progress is and how long it takes. We want to speed that up. And we speed that progress up by coming together, united our voices, and becoming educated. I'm going to ask you to do something today. It sounds very simple, just like asking you to count to 3. But it's actually difficult. I'm going to ask you to listen with your heart. Starting from this moment that we're together, we're going to listen with our heart. What does that mean to listen with your heart? It means that we live in very fast-paced, multidimensional spaces. We're multitasking. We're thinking about what's coming next. Did I have breakfast this morning? Will I have lunch this afternoon? What am I doing this evening? And all of those thoughts occupy our brains. And when we're trying to learn and come together here, I'd like you to free that up and focus simply on whoever is speaking. Whether it's me standing before you, whether it's Chewy and I standing up here together, whether it's a workshop you're going to this afternoon, I'd like to ask you to listen with your heart. That sounds simple, but here's the difficult part. Then I'm going to invite you from listening with your heart to make the journey to your head. With the information that you receive today, make that journey back to your head. We can all feel. We can all become empathetic. But in order for us to make the needed change, we have to become proactive. We have to have a plan of action. So leaving here today, I want you to have an action plan going back to your community, your school. What are you going to do to make that change? So we're making the journey from our heart, where we're going to feel for the topic today, to our head, where we're going to make constructive, proactive change. I was teaching in a program for children who had been labeled severely emotionally disturbed. These children had been kicked out of every school that they had ever attended due to their challenging behavior. Their behavior in classrooms was not understood, disruptive, difficult. So they were kicked out. And when they were kicked out, they came to my classroom. My classroom was a multi-age classroom, multi-ethnic classroom, and all the children in my classroom are children who had been labeled severely emotionally disturbed, and yet these children were not emotionally disturbed. These were children who had been severely abused, neglected, abandoned. These were children whose lives were lives that most people don't want to think about. Children who had been abused, locked in closets, burned with cigarettes, led lives that were very difficult. And from all of that pain inside, their behavior came on the outside. So we'd sit in my classroom every day, myself and these children, and we would use music as a form of connection. We would use music as a way to express how we felt inside. When these children came to my classroom, my job was more important than just teaching them reading, writing, and arithmetic. My job was holistically to try to figure out and try to understand, what is your behavior communicating? What does your behavior mean? How do I help you communicate that in a way that will keep you connected to the schools, keep you connected to your friends and your teachers? So we'd sit in a circle every day and we'd sing songs and we'd engage in social emotional learning. There's a lot of terminology today that you'll hear, right? Trauma-informed classrooms, trauma-informed care, ACEs, meaning adverse childhood experiences, social emotional learning. These terms are very important for us to understand the meaning, and they're important for us to incorporate into our schools at every level so that we can be connected to all children when they come through the door. So we'd sit in our circle and we'd sing our songs and we'd do our music. Now, my population of students was very transient because they might come into my classroom for a period of time because they were removed from their home. They may be living in a group home. They may be living in a foster home. They were a very marginalized community of students, had no voice, had no advocates, and had no school to be connected to. So when they got to me, we would work on that connection. Sitting in a circle one day, singing our songs, I look up, and there's a little girl standing in the doorway. She's got hollow eyes that had lost all their meaning. She stood in the doorway holding on tight to her two best friends, a worn-out old rabbit and a torn-up old turtle. And she just stood in the doorway staring in while I was sitting in a circle with other children. I remember looking at this little girl and I realized she's looking in this classroom wondering, is this a place where I'll belong? Is this a place where I'll feel safe? Is this a place where I'll connect? So we welcomed her into our classroom. Her name was Sarah. And Sarah came in, and for the first, I'd say, few weeks that Sarah's with us, she never said a word. I literally didn't know if Sarah had any more language than the two stuffed animals she kept at her side, because Sarah had chosen to stop talking. She'd been so hurt in the world and had nowhere to go, she just chose to not talk. She kept her stuffed animals, her two best friends, with her. So Sarah'd come into the classroom every day, and we'd be in our circle singing. And we used to sing a song by a children's musician named Red Grammer. If you don't know Red Grammer's music, you might want to look into it. It's all about social emotional learning. It's all about connecting. It's all about different cultures and celebrating who we are as people. So we sat in a circle and we sang one song in particular. And this song was called I Think You're Wonderful. And the words to the song are very simple. I think you're wonderful. When somebody says that to me, I feel wonderful, as wonderful can be. And it makes me want to say the same thing to somebody new. And by the way, I've been meaning to say, I think you're wonderful too. And we'd sing this song every day, and Sarah was in our circle. But Sarah slept most of the time in our circle because Sarah couldn't sleep at night. Night was when the nightmares came. Sarah didn't sleep at night, so a lot of times she'd sleep in the day. She'd sit in our circle with her animals and take a little nap. And that was okay. I had to understand what Sarah was going through and let her begin that process of trust once again. So about 3 weeks into our time together, we came back from lunch one day and we're sitting in our circle, and Sarah just starts to sing. I had not heard Sarah's voice. I did not know that she had language. And she started to sing, I Think You're Wonderful. She sat up in our circle holding on to her 2 stuffed animals, and she knew every single word to that song. Sarah had been quietly listening and absorbing, and the words to that song were making her feel connected. Sarah sang that song, and it was amazing. Sarah was with us for a few months, and then about 6 months into our time together, the social worker came into my classroom, and she said, you know, we found a home for Sarah. And I said, well, that's fantastic. And she said, yes, but it means she's going to leave you. And I thought, wow, okay, how do I take all of this development, the social emotional trust and love, and how do I pass this along with Sarah so that she knows when she goes back out into that world, into a new school, that she has people who love her and care for her and support her. So it was Wednesday. I said, how much time do I have? And the social worker said, she leaves on Friday. Okay, so I have 2 days to think it through. So as Friday came and Sarah was gathering her things up from her desk and getting ready to go with the social worker to her new home, I reached into the tape deck. Yes, we had tape decks back then. I reached into the tape deck, pulled out my tape. It was not an 8-track. It was, it was a cassette. I'm not that old. Pulled out my cassette, and as Sarah was walking by, I said, Sarah, I want you to have this because I think you're wonderful. And Sarah took the tape and she left. And in the work that we do when we work with children who move in and out of our programs, we have to learn how to have healthy goodbyes. And we have to learn to know that we've done something together in our time. Sarah touched my soul, my spirit, my mind, made me a better teacher. And I have to believe that I touched Sarah's mind, soul, and spirit as well. So about 4 years later, Sarah came back to me through the words of a little boy with brown hair and brown eyes. I was teaching in a completely different school, in a completely different program for children who had been abused, neglected, and abandoned. And we were sitting in our circle and we were singing our song. And all of a sudden, this little boy looks up and he says, hey, that's Sarah's song. I thought to myself, well, I know who Sarah is, but how does this little child know who Sarah is? So I kept the music playing and I crawled across the floor and I came up to the little boy, Joey, and I said, hey, Joey, what do you mean that's Sarah's song? And he said, well, when I was living in a foster home, Sarah came to live there. And he said, at night, when I would cry because I missed my mama so much, Sarah would come to my room and sing that song to me. And it made it not hurt so bad. It was in that moment as a teacher that I realized what the meaning of the word wonderful really meant. It meant that we have an opportunity every day to connect on a small level that becomes a big, important, meaningful level. We worry so much about the big changes we can make. It's the small individual differences that we do make every day and where it takes us from there. Sarah was able to use the feeling of that song, the connectivity to our classroom, and share that with another child when they were in pain, when they were hurting. I share that song with you for a reason, because Sarah and Sergio and Angela and JT and Nicholas, I can name 12 children right off the top of my head that over 30 years ago, now I'm really aging myself, but about 30 years, okay, 20-something, something, let's just say. Changed my life. And in that change, they are the why that I stand here before you. I speak all over the United States. I speak internationally. I speak about our school systems and the school to prison pipeline and this epidemic we have occurring and children who have been pushed out. And a lot of times these children are pushed out because of behavior, and that behavior is a communication. All behavior is a form of communication. So in our classrooms, we have students who may be having challenging behaviors. Our teachers don't often know what to do. And when they don't know what to do, they're now pushing children out of the classrooms. Disproportionately, children of certain ethnicities, cultures. And our schools are turning into places where we criminalize children. We have school resource officers on our campuses in the name of school safety, in the name of school discipline. But we're forgetting the name school climate. The climate that we create on our school campuses is what we need to do to connect our children and keep our campuses safe. Not more officers, not more bars on the windows, not more guns, not teachers carrying weapons. School climate is what we need to create. And it takes more time because it takes developing interpersonal relationships with the students and the families in our communities, and that takes more time. Sarah and all the children I named, they're my why. They're why I stand before you, because I watch those children repeatedly go through a system. We know as early as 3rd grade when a child continuously gets in trouble and suspended and expelled. We know that those are young people who are going to disconnect from our school system. And when they disconnect from our school system, they often get connected into our criminal justice system. Our schools are the families when our children leave our homes. When our children walk out our front door, they go to that school, and that school has to be a place that keeps them safe and connected. And when we're losing children at the rate we're losing them to our juvenile justice system, it is literally a school to prison pipeline. And we also talk about the cradle to prison pipeline because we are expelling children as early as preschool now. Children as early as preschool, which is 3 and 4 years of age, are getting expelled. Children that are 5, 6, 7 are getting handcuffed on school campuses for behavioral, disciplinary action. We cannot criminalize our students. We have to keep them connected, and we have to be the voice that helps this connection take place. So I want you to think of your why. Why are you here today? What brought you here on a Saturday morning? Well, we were speaking beforehand, a retired social worker. She's here because what's going on? What's going on in our communities? I still want to be connected. I still want to know. I still want to see what's my role, what's my part, what's my responsibility. I know we have a school social worker over here, right? Okay? We're here. All of us in this room have a why. And the why is what connects you to your learning today. My students were my why, but my students made me spend an enormous amount of time beginning to understand behavior and how behavior communicates something more inside. And that behavior and understanding it comes from the science of child and adolescent development. For the past 20-something years, but specifically the past 10 years, I've been working very intensely training law enforcement. Going into our law enforcement agencies and training officers who are placed onto our school campuses. Training officers that are in our community, in our youth outreach centers. Community policing. I was down in the inner cities of Los Angeles with the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department for the last 7 years, overseeing 17 youth outreach centers throughout the inner cities. And what shocked me was that these officers were trained to be a law enforcement officer, hence the word enforcement, law enforcement. They're not trained to be preventative, okay? They were being placed in these youth centers and told, go connect to these kids in the community with zero training. Blew my mind. I wrote an article that was published in the Juvenile Justice Information Exchange, and the article started out by saying, would you hand a civilian a gun and tell them to go down the street and enforce the law without any training? And the answer is a resounding no. Why? Because you'd be putting people's lives in jeopardy. But when we take law enforcement officers and put them with young people and do not train them in the science of child and adolescent development, we are putting people's lives in jeopardy. We are putting young people's lives in jeopardy. And we are putting a booking number on young people for misdemeanor infractions in school behaviorally that now become a misdemeanor on a path toward the justice system. So we know what we're here to do. You know your own why. And now I want to talk about my how. So what, why, and we all have a how. How are we going to make that change? My how is through the science of child and adolescent development. Understanding ages and stages, brain maturation, holistically knowing who children are. How many of you know 2-year-olds? Anybody know a 2-year-old? Met a 2-year-old? Okay. How many of you know teenagers? Met a teenager, are a teenager? Okay. Do you know that teenagers and 2-year-olds are exactly the same developmentally? Exactly the same. So I'm going to take you on a little walk through the science of child and adolescent development and how a 2-year-old and a teenager are exactly the same. Have you ever found yourself saying, why does my teenager act like a 2-year-old? Because behaviorally and developmentally, they're the same. I'm going to tell you, proof, science. We are born with more neurons in our brain than we will ever use in our lifetime. So by the time we are 2 to 3, our brain starts this phenomenal process called pruning. It's a natural phenomenon. Our brain goes in and sheds the neurons that we're not using to make way for more growth. When you go outside to prune a tree, you prune off the leaves that are brown and dying because you need the ones that are growing to have more oxygen, to have more room, to have more space. Our brains naturally prune around age 2, around age 3. It's a massive work in progress. That brain is working incredibly hard. So because your brain is working so hard to naturally prune, 2-year-olds need a lot of sleep. They need a lot of sleep, and we need to pay attention to their nutritional value because that brain is developing. There's a second time in our lives when our brains do this process again, and it's in our teenage years. So at around, again, we're individual. The science of child and adolescent development is very individual because we're individuals. We're talking about a science that is across all cultures. This is human development. So when we hit our pre-adolescence, our brain prunes again. 2-year-old we're pruning, teenager we're pruning. 2-year-old needs a lot of sleep. Have you ever seen a teenager on the weekends? Do they get out of bed before noon or 1 or 2? Okay. They need a lot of sleep. Teenagers don't have the best nutrition. Can't just fulfill your needs with Takis, Cheetos. So our teenagers need nutritional guidance just as much as our 2-year-olds, right? Well, here's another thing that 2-year-olds and teenagers are just alike on. 2-year-olds, when we are born, we develop from the inside out, okay? Our brain stem, our organs are all developing until we come into the world. So 2-year-olds literally are called toddlers because their head's too big for their body, so when they walk, they toddle. Okay? Teenagers are growing from the outside in, so their limbs are a little awkward. Their feet, they'll go to bed and wake up the next day and wear a different size shoe. Okay? Their arms are a little gangly, their legs are a little long, their feet are a little big. So teenagers are trying to grow into this body that is growing and moving and changing, just like a 2-year-old is learning to walk and explore the world. 2-year-olds are just developing language skills. In fact, a 2-year-old's brain, one hemisphere is a little larger, and that hemisphere deals with emotion. And 2-year-olds don't have a lot of expressive vocabulary. They're learning it. We all have more receptive vocabulary than expressive. We can all understand more than we can communicate. But 2-year-olds are just learning, so they don't quite know how to articulate their needs and their wants. So what do they do when they don't get what they need? They have a temper tantrum, right? Teenagers, they're learning this thing called autonomy once again. They have opinions, they have ideas, they have perspectives, they want to share them. They want to be autonomous, they want to push back a little bit from the family. They want to do more things out in the world on their own, make their own decisions. And when they don't get what they want, have you ever seen a teenager slam a door? Right? Yell. They have their form of temper tantruming because they're still finding the skills to communicate verbally like a 2-year-old. So, our 2-year-olds, brain development, sleep, nutrition, emotion. Our teenagers, brain development, sleep, nutrition, emotion. And our 2-year-olds are now out and about exploring the world because they are mobile now. They're moving, they're walking, they're talking. You know the saying, we spend the first 2 years of life teaching them to walk and talk, and the rest of their life telling them to sit down and shut up. We don't really, but it's a funny saying. So our 2-year-olds are exploring the world, and because they're exploring the world, they need a lot of constructive guidance. They need a lot of constructive guidance. They need adults there prepared to guide them. And when a 2-year-old challenges us behaviorally, we don't punish them. We divert them. We teach that 2-year-old that there is a better way to get that need met. We guide that 2-year-old. If that 2-year-old is over there pulling on the dog's tail, stepping on his sister or brother, we help that 2-year-old figure out a different way to get their needs met and to communicate. We don't punish them. You hear the word diversion all the time as it relates to juvenile justice reform. Well, we need to think that our teenagers need to be diverted in a constructive way. That when they're struggling in our classrooms, in our schools, on our campuses, in our communities, we cannot just revert to punishment. We must revert to diversion. We must show them, guide them, teach them, take them this other way. Because that is what we do with our 2-year-olds. Why does it stop? And our teenagers are now considered horrible, terrible, no good, very bad people if they have all the same things they had when they were 2, right? But now they're bigger and we don't know what to do with the behavior, so we push it over here. We need in our schools and our programs and in our classrooms an understanding developmentally of where our teenagers are and how to divert them to a constructive path, not punish them and send them through the school to prison pipeline. That is directly how the science of child and adolescent development impacts the work that we are doing in this mission, in this cause that we are all here today to learn about. That is my how. You have your how, this is my how. Speaking and training and teaching teachers, law enforcement officers, and youth outreach workers to understand this science. So I'm going to pull a couple of things up on this PowerPoint behind me. There were some shifts in the agenda, so I'm not going through this PowerPoint as if we're doing a workshop this afternoon, but I do want to point out a couple of things about brain maturation and milestones when it comes to our adolescents, so that you can continue to make the connection of how to use this information to change the way our schools are dealing with and working with our young people. So let me pull this up really quickly. Hi, Sam. Sam is my best friend. I think I did something where it all went away. Thanks. That's why you're here. Oops, I pushed the wrong thing. Wait. Is that it? We're looking good. All right. So what is the study of child and adolescent development? It's understanding age and stage milestones. It's understanding brain maturation. And it's understanding children from a holistic perspective. Well, let me take you right to this one slide back. Oh boy. Let's do this. Okay. There we go. Excuse me. Is this high sign? Excuse me. Yay. Yay. Child and adolescent development and behavior. When we study human development, we study 3 primary domains of development. We study social skills guidance, and we study the brain and how it connects to us as every single thing we do from the moment we are conceived interacts with our brain. So right now I'm just going to take you through a couple of concepts in the field of child and adolescent development, a little bit about social skills guidance, and wrap it up with a little bit of our teenage brain. The 3 domains of development that we must pay attention to are the physical, which we call biosocial. The root word is biology, and the word social is connected because children do not develop in isolation, they develop in socialization and in social context. In fact, human developmental theorists propose that we are born as a species with an innate ability to socialize as a method of our species survival. So little beings come into the world ready to socialize. By the time they're 4 months in the womb, they can begin to hear us if typical development is occurring. So they're already making connections to those that they're coming out in the world to meet. And then when they come out in the world to meet us, they spend all of their time in the process of socialization and acculturalization. Look at a newborn child, and all of their time is met trying to understand how to be human. And for some children, they come into communities and families that are surrounding them with skills and social skills guidance and all of those things, and some do not have that. And when they don't have that in their immediate families, they come into our programs, our schools, our communities, and it's our job. Okay? So we have the biosocial domain of development, which is number 2. Then we have the cognitive domain, which is brain maturation and language. And then we have the 3rd domain, which is the psychosocial domain, the root word psychology. So that's our social emotional. And then again, the word social. So children do not develop in isolation. They develop in socialization. When you know these 3 domains of development, you are now paying attention to a child's physical health, a child's behavioral health, and a child's mental health. Those 3 domains. They are intertwined, they work together, and they are called the holistic approach to development, the holistic approach to learning. So when students come into our classrooms from every age, we must pay attention to the intersection of these 3 domains. And we must look at children holistically. So we cannot just pay attention to their cognitive development in school. We have to pay attention to their behavioral health and their mental health. And we must socially guide them constructively. You're going to see me skip a few just for the sake of time and connectivity to what we need to move on to. Brain maturation, some key concepts. All behavior is a result of brain activity. Every risk factor and every protective factor in a child's life before and after birth has an impact on the brain. Okay? The development of higher level thinking skills depends on love and attachment. Love and attachment. Let's stop and absorb that statement for one moment. The development of higher level thinking skills, good morning, depends on love and attachment. And we're not just talking about love and attachment in the home, love and attachment in the schools, love and attachment in the community. Okay? So higher level thinking. So I'm going to take you through that for an important reason. The brain develops from the bottom up. Okay? So the hindbrain is all about fight or flight, automatic reactions, functions of survival. We come into the world and we are a species that wants to innately socialize as a method of our species survival. So that is how the brain is developing. But then the brain moves right here to the center, the midbrain, the amygdala, the emotional center of the brain. And adolescents are having what we call an amygdala hijacking. Basically that means that amygdala has taken over their body and their mind. If you've known teenagers, you know that their decision making is not based in logic, it is based in emotion. Okay? Decision making is not based in logic, it's based in emotion. So when we have adolescents who are struggling to connect to the schools or the communities, we cannot criminalize them. Their decision-making process is still in a developmental stage. In fact, the prefrontal cortex, the last but most important part of the brain, is not fully developed until our late 20s. And I'm telling you, they're going to push that back as we continue to learn about the brain. We know more about the deep depth darks of our ocean than we know about our human brain. We are still continuously learning. But one thing we now know for a fact is that the prefrontal cortex, the development begins at birth, but it's the slowest lobe of the brain to develop. And is not completely developed until now they're saying the late 20s. So why does that matter? Why am I telling you that? Because the prefrontal cortex is the CEO of your brain. The prefrontal cortex is where we make logical, rational, well thought out decisions. Well, we heard on the previous slide that higher level thinking depends on love and attachment. Okay? So our teenagers are thinking with their amygdala. It's all emotional based, and they can't get up here to the prefrontal cortex or higher level thinking until they have love and attachment. So our teachers and our youth outreach workers, we need to know that you are developing a young person's brain with every interaction that you have. And you have to develop it at that emotional level. Give them, show them love and attachment so that we can push it up and we can start to think with the prefrontal cortex. Why does it matter? Because the United States of America locks up more children than any other country in the world. More children than any other country in the world. That's not good to be number one in. And disproportionately locks up children of color. And it's happening in our school systems. They're pushing us into these prison systems because we're not understanding developmentally. 13-year-old, 14-year-old, 15-year-old, 16-year-old, 17-year-old, their brain is not developed and they're not making logical decisions and they need guidance. This is an important place. This is an important phenomenon for us to understand. If we are going to change the school to prison pipeline, we need to start with understanding where our children are developmentally. We have children locked up at age 10. 10 years old, there are children sitting in our jails right now. In our country. We have to start to understand how we guide children developmentally and where they are, where their brains are, so that we understand the decisions that they're making are not based on logic. And we need to help guide them because they are in our classrooms, they are in our communities, and they are part of who we are as a society. So, I know that this law school is paying a lot of attention to this issue in this community. I've read a lot of articles even recently, from finger painting to fingerprints, right? From misdemeanors in the classroom, misbehavior, misunderstanding, to a booking number. These are things that we can change with the knowledge of understanding the science of child and adolescent development. So with that being said, my time running out, I want to thank you for, one, participating in our opening activity and waking your brain up, because you're awake now. I woke you up for the whole day. And if you get a little sleepy, start counting to 3. Grab somebody and say, hey, can you count to 3 with me? Can you clap? Can you snap? Can you stomp? Okay, so your brain's awake, and I thank you for that. The more we participate today in every workshop and every panel discussion, the more we're going to walk away with and know. I ask you to remember your why you're here, and take that why and travel from your heart to your head. Okay? We're here because we care. We're here because we know that we need to stop what's happening in our schools. But how is what we need to figure out today before we depart. And I told you my how. My how is training law enforcement, youth outreach workers, and educators in the science of child and adolescent development. This is a science, my friends. This is not my opinion. And through this science, we know that we can connect to our young people and that we can guide them constructively into the process of becoming well-rounded, constructive members of our society and community. We must do it together, and we must not wait. This quote on the wall, it's a long road, but it bends towards justice. That's what we're here to do today, to move that and bend it a little further and faster. I want to thank you, and I want to leave a few minutes if anybody has any questions that are burning off the top of your head. Any questions? Okay.
Gail, speak into the mic, please.
Is this on? It is.
I just wanted to add, as an Indigenous member of our nation, we also have the spiritual aspect.
Absolutely.
We cannot forget that.
Never.
And I
That's
always
that
remember.
Psychosocial domain.
Yeah, my grandma always says, the dominant society is here to teach you your education, to survive in this culture, but don't ever forget to pray.
Right.
So I pass that on to generations
Nice.
in our community. So I just encourage everybody to step out and start praying.
Mm-hmm.
We can't do that in the classroom, but we can do it in our rooms,
Right.
in our homes. Bless yourself, bless your teachers, your community, your students.
Mm-hmm.
I just encourage us to do that.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
What is your first name?
Gail?
Gail. So what Gail's saying is so critically important, and if I had time, I'd be here all day with you, and we would go into the concept of multiple intelligences and what that means about that spiritual realm. And you're right, we're not necessarily able to pray out loud in our classrooms per se, but we can all be within, and we can all share whatever that spiritual path is for you, and that is part of that well-being of that child's holistic picture, right? Knowing that the behavioral health, mental health, all rolls into that spiritual health, and I greatly agree and greatly appreciate that. Yes. Yes, please.
I'm just interested in knowing how the officers responded to your training, and then what results you saw.
Aha. Great question. Working with law enforcement has been a challenge. Law enforcement is trained to be authoritarian and to enforce the law. So we know in our field of study that the most effective way to work with young people is to be authoritative. In other words, to have shared decision making and to say that I respect your voice, your opinion, your idea, and you respect mine. Coming into law enforcement, in the very beginning, to them, this was all like brand new. And when I first came in, I'm in a room, and first, when I got out in Los Angeles, it was probably 40 or 50 officers, and the majority of them were male. They were in uniform, they were wearing guns, and I'm standing up here telling them they have to constructively guide and discipline children, and they're looking at me, and I thought they were going to shoot me. They didn't. And after about 4 trainings in, these officers are very hungry for information and knowledge and began to very much embrace the idea. What sold them, and I've heard them say it, is that it's a science. And so they felt that it empowered them in their work in the community. I train probation officers also, and I think they're a very important component. And just started a new contract with a new group of 50 officers. And again, about the fourth training in, they say they now run to the trainings because they say it's practical information that they can use when they're out in the community or in the schools connecting with young people. So they've really embraced it, but it isn't an easy path to get them to embrace it. And in respecting how they're trained and why and the purpose is, it's trying to bring those different multidisciplinary perspectives together. And that's a challenge. It's a great question, but I've had a successful response. So that's great. Yes. Hi.
Thank you, Dr. K, for coming to Utah. I appreciate it. Thank you for sharing your story about the student with the stuffed animal. The connection I just made was we've been having a lot of discussion around students being able to wear hoodies. Middle school teacher, and I whispered to Lamar, the comfort of those stuffed animals truly for me has always been the hoodie situation, right? I have a lot of students that are refugees, have a lot of trauma at home, and that, like, noticeably, it's not a stuffed animal like all of us are used to, but that hoodie provides so much comfort and almost a barrier, and to be able to be in that hoodie is just a comfort piece.
Absolutely.
So just on a daily basis, students might not be coming to your classes with a stuffed animal, but what they wear, how they behave, they put their head down, and that body surveillance and sending them to the office because they have a hoodie on is just a simple thing to be looking for. So thank you.
Absolutely. What is your first name?
Chelsea.
Chelsea, thank you. Chelsea makes a very critical point that children will display their communication behaviorally through their clothing, through their artwork, through their stories, through their withdrawal, whatever it might be, and it is our job to understand that and not be afraid. Don't be afraid of the hoodie. Don't be afraid of a child coming into your room with certain ways that they express themselves, right? But we do quickly decide that we're going to label, we're going to judge, we're going to be afraid of, we're going to push away. So it may not be those physical stuffed animals, but it is another piece of comfort that gives them love and attachment, which then can help them learn. Very, very well said. I know I have to step off. No. Oh, okay.
So the first question is, what is the best way to teach child development to the greatest number? There are a lot of people that would benefit, but it's hard to teach everybody quickly.
That's a great question. I think it starts with all of you spending a Saturday coming here and then going back to your respective places of work. I'm talking to someone online, I assume? Or, oh, someone's here. Oh, okay. So I'm going back to your respective places of work and beginning to share that there is a science and it can help us understand children developmentally. How do you bring that to your school, to your community? Okay? So we go out and train. I do have a website, and I'm not here to plug it, but you can go to it, and I do have my PowerPoints, and I do have videos, and I do have a book, an ebook online called I Can't Come to School Today. My mom's in prison, and I don't have a ride. And that's an exact quote from one of my students who couldn't make it to school. And I would say, if you can't make it to school today, friend, just let me know you're alive and well in the world. And my student called me up and said, hey, teacher, I can't make it to school today. And when I said, why not? He said, well, my mom's in prison and I don't have a ride. And it was from that point, thinking 6 hours out of the day, those children are with us. And then the rest of the day, they're in lives that we don't know about and we need to understand and connect to. So there's that availability, short vignettes and stories. Beautiful question. I think it starts here. Also going to my website, which is easy. It's enforcemented.com, enforcemented.com. Going back to your places of work and speaking to your supervisors and asking them to invite people to come in that can do workshops and trainings. I have an entire model where we embed ourselves into school districts for an entire year. And we train students, teachers, officers, and parents holistically. Students love to learn child development and brain maturation. They love to learn where they are, and it fascinates them to know. And the feedback you get sometimes is amazing. Wow, I learned I have so much more potential. My brain's still growing. I always tell them when you get in trouble, just tell your parents your PFC is still cooking. Right? My prefrontal cortex is not done. So I'm still working on it. Right? It's a good question.
Another one we have on the app is, does the brain prune at any other stage of adolescence? Any other stage after adolescence, sorry.
As far as we know now in our field of study, it has two major times of pruning. It's early on during the first few years of life and then again at pre and adolescence. And those are the major times. So no, but again, there's so much yet we still have to discover about our brains. I wouldn't put it off that something like that could still come up. But right now, those are the 2 stages, and those are the needs that we have. It's major brain work. It's major brain work. Yes. Hi.
So much. That was really awesome to think about the ways that you can impact outside of the classroom. For teachers who are in the classroom, do you have, sometimes the weight of all of this can feel so heavy, and I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on teacher burnout and the kind of weight of social justice and helping in the school to prison pipeline on like teacher mental health.
That's an excellent question. This can give you a lot of burnout. It's a heavy weight. There's a lot to happen. What do we do? So I taught for many, many years primarily children who are abused, neglected, abandoned, homeless, incarcerated, pregnant teenage girls, young people involved in gangs, and it can really be difficult. So yes, self-care is number 1 for you as an outreach worker, an educator, someone in the community. Self-care and having conversations with your colleagues that are constructive. We put a lot of negative vocabulary and language around this topic and around children in particular that challenge us. So children are described as defiant or delinquent, right? Instead of us finding ways to describe them developmentally. So if we can start to switch the language of our classrooms, the language of the way we speak about children, it does lighten that load. When you think you have a child showing up and other teachers have already told you this pathway or this is a terrible, horrible, no good, very bad child, you know, you're expecting someone to come in. The big thing is don't think you have to manage someone else's behavior. That drains us, right? Look, I don't want to manage your behavior. I don't even want to manage my behavior. You should see me on the weekends. I don't manage my behavior. But when we think we have to manage this person's behavior, that person becomes something that we're frustrated with already. We don't want to manage children's behavior. We want to understand it. Understand it. I could stay here all day with you and talk about the importance of changing that language alone. If I think I want to understand you, I really have a whole new energy about being with you. If I think I have to manage you and make you sit and not socialize and participate, then I'm battling you all day, right? We get into power struggles. We get into things that are unnecessary. So think about the language you use in your programs. Understand one another. Understand children. Understand families. Learn. And they're not delinquent, terrible, horrible, no good. Let's not be afraid of a hoodie. Let's not be afraid of someone coming and they dyed their hair 6 colors. These things should not scare us. Maybe young people are talking to us through behavior or talking to us through decisions, but just talk to them. Find out. Does that make sense? Yeah, it's really a shift. And it's a paradigm shift. With law enforcement, it's a paradigm shift in thinking. And with teachers and educators as well. There's not enough child development in our education curriculum. And I think that's a mistake. This should be in all of our teaching credential curriculums. Okay. Anybody else?
Good morning. Thank you. My name is Tara, and I'm from down south of San Juan County. I do a lot of youth outreach through the different nonprofit organizations that I work for. And I think the biggest thing that I have found so far, being a Native American, having gone through the relocation, the assimilation, and all of that, through the tribes, through history, and what I'm finding in recent outreaches that I've done throughout the community in San Juan County is the fact that kids need to have an identity. With this movement with the Bears Ears National Monument, you know, I did a student outreach in Halchita, and you could tell, you know, but the students wearing the hoodie with the different colors and all of that, their hair's colors and stuff. And so knowing the fact that Bears Ears is what identifies them, their history's there, their culture's there. So with Native American, it has a lot to do with who we are, where we're coming from, and knowing that and giving the kids that identity to go on is something that really, because when I did the outreach last summer, I had students crying in my audience, just knowing that somebody can identify them.
Right.
That was
very, very powerful. Tara, you say your name? Yes. Tara, thank you so much. So, I just don't want to go away. I'd love to stay here all day. You guys have so many great things to share and contribute. Cultural humility. We do a lot of training on cultural humility. What cultural humility stemmed out of the medical world, where doctors had to take it down a notch and know your patient knows their own body, your patient knows what they need. Yes, you're an expert in this area, but cultural humility brings that balance into perspective when I work with you. Okay? That concept of cultural humility moved out of the medical profession into other arenas, and youth outreach, education, and even law enforcement, we go out and train on the concept of cultural humility. I'm going to meet you in this space where you are, and I'm going to respect that you have so much to teach me. And yet at the same time, I have stuff to share with you. And I think when we meet each other there in a place of sharing and mutually respecting each other's cultures, that's lacking heavily in our school systems. Heavily. And if we can teach teachers that way, when students were in my classroom, I spent as much time getting to know them before we ever started getting to know our subject matter, right? And learning from them. Who are you? You let me know who you are. Let me know what that hoodie means to you. Let me know why you want to wear this. And cultural humility is a part because our young people who are in our school to prison pipeline and our communities that are marginalized, those are some of the effects. They lose a sense of identity. They lose a sense of self. And remember, when you talk about brain maturation, if we lose a sense of self, we can't move to that higher level thinking, right? So we've got to remember that emotional piece. So that's beautiful. Yes?
There are two other questions. One of them is about pro bono legal work. So whoever asked that, feel free to come and talk to me, and I'll try and see if I can speak to that. And otherwise, the question is, I agree it is important to understand developmental immaturity of adolescents, but how does a family keep itself safe from an angry teenager? How does a community do that sans the criminal justice system?
Excellent, excellent. I was waiting for that question. Okay? Because when we teach about understanding development, very often people misunderstand that it means that children can just do whatever they want without consequences. And so another component of our field of study is to understand the difference between punishment and constructive guidance and discipline. Children need discipline. Children need constructive guidance. As we talk, they come into the world learning to be human and learning through social skills guidance. So when children struggle behaviorally and maybe they are angry and their anger becomes escalated, safety is always number one. So we cannot let children harm themselves or others, and we do have to step in and stop that, but not just stopping it through punishment. So as this person so brilliantly said, sans the criminal justice system, there are children who are going to have to be in touch with, in a more formalized manner, with law enforcement. We're not saying open the gates and let everybody out and don't do anything. But if our law enforcement offices can begin to understand children developmentally, they're going to be more constructive in their outreach as well. And in that time frame that that young person needs a little tighter grip around them, that is our job. Children will often draw a circle around themselves to push you out. And your job is to draw a bigger circle around them to get them back in. We can't keep pushing them out. We need to keep drawing them in through the understanding. And so discipline is a part of this methodology, but discipline is very different than punishment. Punishment is ineffective and does not do anything in the long run. And when we're punishing our young people during their developmental stages, we are very often pushing them into a career criminal mindset, where they will go from this junior juvenile justice into the larger incarceration system. And that's where we have to stop and say no more. And so yes, children need guidance, they need discipline, they don't need punishment, and we can do that through the science of child development. Okay?
Wonderful. That was our last question. Join me in giving a round of applause.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I mean, we really could stay here all day talking about it, but we have a full day of programming to get to. But we have a quick 15-minute break, so if you need to do another round of counts to wake up, or if you want to cheat and get some caffeine, you have a few minutes to go do that, and then come back into this room. I think it's, oh wait, that's actually just the